Hello and welcome to this week's EdTech Pulse. My name is Joel Christensen, and today we are looking at Google Forms, the multi-tool for the classroom. When I first started teaching, Google Forms was just coming out, and I loved the idea of using Google Forms for collecting that classroom data. Gone were the days of handing out paper tickets, trying to collect and then organize. Google Forms gave me the opportunity to get the opinions of the class and then having them organized nicely for me. Since then, uh, I think we've all become very, very used to Google Forms and beginning to see the different ways that they can be used to help our kids access content and also represent their understanding. So this week we're going to be looking at a couple different ways that Google Forms can be used. We're going to look at some simple ways, some kind of those nice solid foundational pieces, and then start to get up in complexity and kind of look at the different opportunities that Google Forms can give our children. So to start off, we're going to take a look at my first attempt, and this is probably something that most of us are familiar with, where we are asking our students questions, and we're gathering that information so that we can use this to kind of help guide our decision makings for content or different materials in this case that we're using. Now, for our students, some of our students, this would be no problem, but others need those images or video supports. And so Google Forms right within this window allows you to connect and attach videos or pictures to help open up those avenues to learning. And it's as simple as finding those add image icons. These are available in our pictures as well as our answers as well as our questions. And so by incorporating these accessibility pieces, these opportunities to create those visual content connections, we allow our students to get, show more of what they can do. And so from here with their responses, if we jump into the preview, another great part of Google Forms is that opportunity to go and see how it looks before you share it out. You can see that we've got a couple of videos here that the students can watch. We've got these required questions that are going to force students to answer them if they don't answer them, they cannot submit the form. And then we have these images for the different answers. And I just really appreciate this part of Google Forms because it does allow me as a teacher to put those scaffolded supports in, the chocolate chips and the cookies before I bake them, rather than trying to get that stuff done once we're already kind of in front of the kids. Stepping past that, my next piece was creating checklists for my students. So with Google Forms, rather than just collecting information from the kids, I can actually create one where I'm recording information for my students. So this is an example of something that Monica Burns created, and I definitely stole that from her. So this class checklist is, I'm the only one filling out this form. So in this form, I've got my objective here. This is where I can put in what my students are focusing in on. So if it's representing numbers up to 1,000, and now I have this kind of simple, I'm using a 1-point rubric, a glow or a grow. And as I'm observing and kind of watching students interact with my activities or with my learning experiences, I can just do a quick little visual, an observation of their learning and just make some quick observational pieces. Once I've got all my students in, I can hit submit, and I can always come back and submit another response. So you can see that this is so general that I can use the same form again and again. I could, of course, put a specific type or subject area, content area within this objective question so that I can, when I go to check my responses, I can go to this view in sheet. Another great piece of Google Forms is that it keeps you organized because, I'm disorganized sometimes, but you can see it's got the timestamp here, so I can see the days that I've made these observations. I've got my objectives here, and then I've got my grow or glow comments. Now, of course, these are formative pieces. This is just for me as a teacher to begin to get a better picture of how my students are doing with the content. But I can come back into this checklist and I can change my columns, right? I could add my levels of proficiency. I could add, for social emotional learning, I could add my indicators there. There's so many different options that I, as a teacher, can put in here, with the idea that I'm the one filling out the content, and so it's really just for me to have access to that stuff later on. It's a pretty easy, for me at least, to click and go, and then it gives me that snapshot of learning later on in my students, or for my students. Now, continuing along the Google Forms, the multi-tool aspect is this idea of quizzing. So we can actually build quizzes and create those kind of formative pieces for our students. And again, leveraging those videos and picture tools. But now instead of, again, collecting kind of information about the kids or making my anecdotal observations, I'm now gathering evidence of the student's understanding. So in this case, this was for a show or tell. Is the author showing or telling the character's feelings? And this was just to start to get them to understand how descriptive details play such an important role in us painting the pictures in our minds. Now, once the students filled this out, it was an immediate, this can be automatically graded. You can see in my settings, I can come up and I have made this a quiz. I release the grades. I can change all of these different settings for my students to get that immediate feedback. Within my quiz, I can actually give feedback for the correct answer or for the incorrect answer. So if I wanted, if a student, identified it in the wrong way, then I would be able to provide that feedback. How does this show the character's feelings? Do we see their face? Do we hear their voice? Or is it just telling us about the feelings? And so that piece, again, creates that opportunity for students to be independent in their learning, right? They get to, instead of having, they can try as many times as they like. It's not about getting it right the first time, but it's about going back and getting those pieces correct so that later on, um, they have that knowledge and they kind of remember those experiences. We got two more. So my soul story feedback, this was all about students giving feedback to each other. So I used an extension, called Autocrat. And Autocrat basically allows you to take these pieces and put them in an email. So you can connect a Google form to a Google Doc. And it's a bit of a process, but I wanted to see if I could create opportunities for feedback to be more meaningful. And so with this, the students were able to receive an email automatically with these different pieces, right? And so by asking students to read each other's work and then to add these elements in, it really created that more comprehensive feedback that sometimes is more difficult when we're engaging in just a discussion, a dialogue back and forth. To me, it also provided me an opportunity to see what kind of feedback were students giving. And then instead of, it kind of gave me a sense of who to talk to. Was it the student who received the feedback but didn't really put it into play? Or was it the student who was giving the feedback and wasn't really giving those specific details or those actionable items for students to grow in that learning objective? And then last but no way least, the branching aspect of Google Forms is just huge. So this is a form that I created when I was teaching grade 9. This was for right when we went into lockdown. So it was right after spring break, and we were doing this kind of like remote learning. It was mostly like putting content up and then having students interact with it and then hosting kind of live hours, like trying to keep my regular classroom hours, but at the same time, there's a lot of complexities back then. So some students were awesome about checking in all the time, and other students really kind of for lack of a better term, kind of disappeared. They handed in their assignments, but they weren't really interacting online. And so I leveraged the branching aspects of Google Forms in my check-in. So I would ask them to check in once a week. And so you can see very basic stuff, trying to keep it light, trying to keep it simple. But with the branching elements, basically what it allows you to do is have students travel different paths through the same form. So up here is how have you been feeling this week? After that question, it would say care to share yes or no. So if they said yes, I would ask them to tell me about it. If they said no, I didn't think it was good for them to go and see this. So I asked would have them go to section 3 where it talked about the live lessons during that week. In here, if they, again, I branched these two questions. If they attended the live lesson, they would go here. If they did not, they would come here. And that just allowed me again to kind of give students that opportunity to get into those avenues that reflected for them. And with Google Forms, it was a pretty simple click and click. That is it for me this week. If you have any questions or concerns about Google Forms, come check out the EdTech SharePoint page or reach out to your EdTech consultant. Have a wonderful week.